So this presentation is Got Grass, our community-led solutions and regional strategies for restoring Midwest grasslands and climate resilience. If that is not the session you intended to be in, now is your time. Well, that one, shut the door. So for us, we're going to do some presenting, and we'll make sure to use our microphones, so it's in the recording. But we're not going to try and go too long, because really what we're here for is the reason that we're in person, to utilize all of you, to be with you, to collaborate with you, to go over some things in depth as a group, and help build out each of these respective organizations that we're going to tell you about even better. So with that, start with Brent. Oh, we're starting with me. Hello, I'm Sadie Neuman. This is me, a couple of images of me. I always have a really hard time introducing myself, figuring out where to place myself. I am one of those people who loves to do a lot of different things. And so I pop up in a lot of different spaces, often with a smile on my face, looking to volunteer. Weird. So I live in Winona, Minnesota, southeastern Minnesota, in the driftless area along the Mississippi River. I am so in love with it that I took a job that's 2.5 hours away and made the commute for a while. I come from a background in a couple different areas: communications, political science, public administration, as well as environmental science. And so I have been chasing those intersections for a couple of years. For a while, I've worked in local government, and served as an AmeriCorps member. A lot of my work is in stormwater, whether that's the intersection of community, as well as the actual nature-based solutions, and a lot of facilitation. I spoke with someone this morning who said, usually facilitators don't go to become a facilitator. Like, everyone in facilitating falls into it somehow. So that made me feel really great today, because that's a new skill that I am learning. So these are lots of great things that I like to do in Winona.
Yeah, we'll use that. And hi, everybody. I'm Brent Rudolph with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. I'm a proud husband. My amazing partner is in student affairs. Oh, we have it auto advancing here somehow. We'll see how long that continues to perplex us. Is in student affairs. She's works at Michigan State University. We work so we live in that area. I'm a proud father. The 2 daughters there, that photo I think is from 8 years ago. I first left. I worked for a state wildlife agency for most of my career. When I first made a shift into nonprofit and started going on the road a lot more, that was an early trip my daughters went on with me down to Atlanta and back up to Michigan on a kind of whirlwind connection. And I'm also a hunter. My 2 bird dogs in the bottom here. I did not grow up hunting. I grew up in Metro Cleveland, Parma, Ohio. Folks are familiar with it, northeast Ohio. But was always very active in the outdoors and got into hunting later as a wildlife student, studying wildlife management and ecology. I have shifted into kind of a broader connection to land use, agricultural policy, and other things from that connection of my employer and work with Pheasants Forever. And I'll kick things off. We'll kind of introduce our organizations and our intersection with these topics in framing up what we'll be looking to engage you all about here today.
All going to be chatting.
Good. Good, thank you. So from my organization standpoint, why are we involved and engaged in this arena? Well, looking a couple years ago at a launch of a fundraising campaign, our Call the Uplands campaign, you might expect from the name of our organization, we enter from interests in quail and pheasants, and I'll also say other upland game birds, other hunted game birds and species. Bobwhite quail have experienced an 83% decline in their population. There is some overlap here in the Midwest. They also have strongholds in the Southeast. Pheasant populations have declined about 70% since the 1970s. And it's not just those game birds. North American grasslands and North American grassland birds have experienced some of the same interlinked trends. looking at monitoring across North American bird populations. Those grassland birds have suffered the biggest declines across any terrestrial biome. You can see a figure down the bottom, about 43% decline in overall grassland bird populations, again, since 1970. And there is a especially pronounced impact as we look here in the Midwest. So we look broadly. In the Midwest, we've obviously had a lot of urban and residential development as well, but this is the breadbasket for a lot of our agriculture. And there's maps and figures through the rest of the globe, but essentially some assessments are suggesting that about 60% of the world's overall land surface has biodiversity reduced beyond the ability for those systems to be maintained long term. So beyond the capacity for them to be sustained and then to sustain our populations as well. And some of that greatest impact you can see from this little inset here is looking at that prior map I demonstrated of this tallgrass prairie region, which is the corn and soy belt now. Midwest tallgrass prairies also, just from the biodiversity perspective, I know we're talking about climate, but there's some interlinkage here. Midwest tallgrass prairie is particularly diverse, about 40 to 60 grass species that formerly were arranged in that area, over 300 forbs, flowering plants, but less than 4% really of the total tallgrass prairie extent still remains, much less than that in some individual states and regions. And so our team, as we got a variety of ways that we deliver habitat, try to put habitat essentially back on the ground. But a big part of that is working with one-on-one, meeting with growers, meeting with agricultural producers, farmers, and ranchers to identify and develop management plans and to enroll them in government programs, especially that provide cost share or partial rental payments for taking, especially those lower yielding ground and acres, and restoring them to some version of habitat instead. That team has grown from around 4 folks starting off in 2003 to over 300 positions now over just a 2-decade kind of period of time. Bottom line, as we look at this broader relevance, then, we try and really frame this up more broadly because the work we do, yes, we're looking at serving members that have an interest in pheasants and quail. We have interest in serving agricultural producers that need to have economically viable ways to make these transitions. We try and really demonstrate that delivery. What we're trying to put habitat back on the ground is also yielding an incredible variety of sustainability benefits that we kind of cluster under categories of prosperous communities, water stewardship, biodiversity, and climate solutions. So we referenced in the session the Midwest Grasslands Summit, and that was a summit from this past August that brought together a variety of stakeholders. I'll give you a little perspective on who participated there, but to say primarily from the standpoint of conservation organizations that are trying to look at the wildlife related and plant species related needs to restore grassland systems, bringing folks together to shape a unified vision for Midwest grassland specifically, but then that reaches to the broader, wider array of partners and organizations that have a vested interest in that in our region, and to look to try and build a more active coalition of stakeholders inclusive of the diverse values around grasslands, and then identify some collaboration actions to pursue as next steps. So attendance was, again, mostly government agencies. Oh, it's going to be, there we go. Government agencies and NGOs. You can see a few folks that the traditional, very involved and engaged private landowners that provide a private landowner perspective, but probably don't represent average folks in terms of agricultural producers. And representation from academia. So part of the interest and part of the outcomes identified is finding the broader communities that we can continue to engage with. And then I'm not going to dive into this in detail, but coming out, some additional information has already been done to understand kind of the broader segments of the population. And so there's some emerging information already around different segments of passionate folks that identify strongly to grasslands, all the way down to folks who are entirely indifferent, don't really know, care, or think about it much in their standard day-to-day. Pause if there's any quick questions of anything I too quickly rambled over, and then we'll hand off to Sadie as well. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. So the question was some of the benefits that pheasants provide. So again, I talk about biodiversity. We leverage very much the growing interest in biodiversity. Pheasants are not native to North America, but they depend upon those grassland systems that we've lost. And actually, as you look at the Midwest, especially the Midwest tallgrass prairie region, we're not going to restore that 94+% that's been lost. But what we will have the ability to do is to bring more of that habitat back in, intermixed with agricultural land. And pheasants actually do very well in that mixture of land. The other connection is the hunting agencies, organizations, other NGOs, and hunters themselves have a pretty substantial investment in conservation. So finding ways to say we're going to work to try and restore something that they value, and those rural communities often value, is the hunting traditions of pheasant hunting in those places, but recognize that by doing that, we're actually restoring many of the native plant communities. We have needs to restore many of the native plant communities in order to kind of continue to provide. Yeah. I think there was another one here. Yeah. I'll follow up with you afterwards, or follow up with me afterwards. Yeah, there's a coalition of organizations that did some focus groups and other works beginning to look at how to build a nationwide kind of perspective, not explicit to the Midwest, but yeah, I'll be happy to connect. All right.
Thank you. Yes. Awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much. My group that I am here representing, and I have to tell you, I am very nervous and very new to it. Well, okay, so very new and very nervous about it. This group was really started by an incredible small number of people together, some that I knew and called friends, and others that I now call friends. They asked me last fall what I'm doing and if I would be interested in serving as an executive director. And that is not normally my role. My favorite role is like the assistant, the chief of staff kind of thing. So being the actual face part makes me very nervous. So I'm very, bear with me, please. This is new for me. So Restoravore, it is an organization. It is a hyper-local, community-rooted nonprofit rethinking how we live with the land. The story is about restoration, connection, and resilience anchored in native ecosystems and community trust. I wanted to briefly kind of give you an idea of why, well, actually, I don't think the organizers knew that while our two presentations and models, organizations are very different from one another, we actually had the very similar goal of submitting proposals and why we wanted to be here and present. And really that is all about the connection and learning from everybody else and also sharing out more materials. And so there's this fun, I guess for me, kind of scale. Like we're thinking about this Restoravore at the super hyper local scale, the small roots, grassroots kind of thing, and learning how that connects up to that landscape scale and how they can each learn from and benefit one another. So like I said, how it started, this is the group of families that started this organization. The majority of them have no background in ecological restoration or agriculture or business and markets, anything like that. They are simply a group of families that just really care all about the place that they live in. And they happen to live together in this valley. It's called Pleasant Valley. That's the map that's over here that you can look at later if you'd like. It is in the driftless area of Winona, so it's very bluffy. So we have these very dramatic, steep 500-foot bluffs that come down often to a small like stream, a little stream that then goes into the Mississippi River. So this group of families happens to live all in that same area, and most people in there have some amount of land that could use restoration, whether it's, they have a house that butts right up against a bluff, and while they don't do a whole lot with it, they have a whole bluff side in their property, or whether they are down next to a stream and they have a huge amount. A number of people that live in this valley do either have like cattle or they farm a small amount of land, there are working lands within this valley as well. But this group of families specifically wanted to try and figure out how they could do things differently and do better. Obviously, very motivated by their young kids, figuring out how to leave it better for them. And also knowing, like Brent had pointed out, that the land now is very different from what it used to be. And they wanted to figure out how they can support something similar while still acknowledging we're never going to get back to what things were exactly. We'll never have elk again. The Mississippi River will never be undammed. Sorry, that can get controversial, but so this is the group of families that started this. And they really had a motivation. They asked, what would it look like to restore native prairie and savanna, not just for beauty, but for function and for the future? What if we used grazing animals, not as tools for extraction, but for healing? Their mission that they took some time to come up with together is to advance native land use, advance restorative land use practices that reintegrate communities with native ecology. They had this very huge, broad, sprawling goal for a very small area. So the model that they have, it includes regenerative grazing. There is native prairie and savanna restoration. We do invasive species management. There is native food markets that we are working on, and a ton of community education, as well as some research collaborations with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And at the core, through all of it, while focusing on the grazing and the vegetation and species suited to our terrain, we manage the invasive species, build soil, and reconnect habitat. We work to create local food markets tied to these practices, native fed markets, and support the lands that it comes from. Education and peer-to-peer learning are woven into all of it. So why it matters? Restoravore isn't just about the land, it's about the people. They're providing that small-scale, community-led model that can restore ecosystems while creating social and economic value. The power of it is in the relationships. It's across disciplines, it's between neighbors, and it's the land itself. And that part of it was super, super important to those folks. I mean, like I said, most of them do not have a background in natural resources at all. In fact, a fair amount are in medicine. But they really felt that lack of community that a number of them grew up with, and they wanted to know, how do somebody has to start rebuilding it. So why not them? I wanted to share this one just to show you kind of what their social media has looked like. What are the kinds of things that they're sharing and ways that they're trying to engage with everybody around them and bring more people in. Let them know that this isn't a super specific, there isn't a narrow, we only do burns, right? It's not just that, there's a ton. And so they're really trying to make sure that all neighbors and everyone in the area know, like, if you are passionate about it and we have an opportunity, we're passionate about trying to figure out, can we do something there? We do have a professor on the team as well. So I have the urge to put him as a PI on a lot of grant applications, even though he's like, that's not my area of specialty. So we try to stay within either our area of expertise that we have or bring in professionals, which is super, like, we're very fortunate to have a lot of natural resource managers in the area who are also passionate about working with the community. All right, was that my last one? Oh, I wanted to talk about where our stories intersect a little bit. So Restoravore is just the one example of the hyperlocal leadership, but we know that there are many others. And we want to find the ones that you have, what you're thinking about, what you could possibly think about and create or support. What are other community-rooted models that are out there? How can we connect? What can we build together that none of us could do alone? And do you want to start with discussion prompts?
Yeah, well, perfect. So I think that our thought process was. Okay. Our thought process was to have breakouts that go into folks that want to focus more at what are the resources, what are the available information gaps, and the network that we can build more broadly at a Midwestern kind of regional scale. And then what are examples of existing or emerging or potential new hyperlocal capacity building initiatives? So spreading that way. We didn't know if like 99% of you would have more of an interest in one topic than another or not, because we're trusting that you'll have an idea about where you feel most invested. And then we thought we might do a quick switch back into the other session to do. So if you want to go to the landscape level one, but then you want to have a shorter session to go and get kind of a recap from the local level one, you can. I'll share from my side on this landscape level. I've dropped into the app. Hopefully, folks have it in there in the chat. There's 3, I believe, links to resources. You can get a full report on the Midwest Grassland Summit. That is the kind of call to action for the initiative, and a couple of other resources relevant to grasslands and birds. And then I put 2 different prompts, one regarding more information gaps and information that we do or don't have regarding grassland connections, especially to climate resiliency and nature-based climate solutions. And then a second one that's more about capacity building, but again, from a regional kind of scale and scope. So if you want to break in the regional one, that's my key focus, and obviously going with what folks have a broader interest in or expertise themselves, but that kind of information, solid foundation for what we would be trying to accomplish, and then community or capacity building and networking at that regional level. And then
And for mine, woof, there's something about like stepping off to the side that my brain is like, oh, you're cool now. And you had other things to tell them. So for mine, it's not about, it is about all those different threads, all the different pieces. I did not mention the fact that these people together put together a yak co-op. We now have yaks. We are working with this new, if anybody went on the agrivoltaics tour yesterday, those no fence on the sheep, I didn't know they were gonna have that. We have that. And it's really unique. It's new. And so it was super exciting for me to see it somewhere else in action. And so that's a partnership with the private industry. We are also helping support other neighbors who already have their own like ranching. There's both bison up on top of the bluff, and then I'm so sorry, I'm still learning the names of cows. I come from geology. I know rocks and water. Somebody asked me about trees, and I was like, I know it's like the little bud thing that you have to look at to tell the difference. Spotted cow. It's a spotted cow. Yeah. So anyways, it's trying to figure out things like we knew about the Audubon has a bird certification for ranchers that you can do. And so we tried to help, say it again, bird friendly beef. So trying to help like make those kinds of connections, but also now we're trying to figure out what to do with the yak wool. Like who spins and cleans yak wool? Lucky for us, one person in the area, but otherwise like that's a long ways away. So anyways, my discussions that I want to focus on are those like the spaghetti, the incredible number of sprawling connections that you can make, and how do you make those connections and make it beneficial for both of you and like find something exciting and new, but also figure out which ones are like really viable for putting a lot of more energy into, or asking others to come in and invest their time and energy into developing it further. Like, how do you do that?
So I think what I suggest, I just confirm the room next door is open. So that's the one available to us. It's open and unlocked. So that's fantastic. So since you have some maps and information here, I'm going to head over there. We have a little over half the time remaining still. So we'll kind of go in each of those sessions, whichever one you feel most interested in starting off with. You can stay here, you can move next door, run for about 15 minutes with some discussion and sharing out. And then we'll give a pause for folks that are like, all right, I've gotten what I contributed and got what I need here. I'd like to switch over. You can switch over. And if you're happy where you are, you want to keep staying where you're staying. And then we'll continue to feed out. Like the app will remain inactive for 3 months afterwards. I'm new, you're not to this. So use it for some chat and feedback and other things that'll be archived here too. I think we would have a goal to do it, but recognizing a lot of breakouts have not been able to wrangle people back into a combined thing together. So why don't we throw out now if there's anything that's important while we're both here before we launch? We'll quickly take that, yeah, for either or both of us respond to it.
Local government, we've seen a lot of private solar development coming into our community. We're a very agrarian community, but we also have a higher education institution. Folks have a lot of valid questions and concerns about what that development looks like. And we've seen community interest in agrivoltaics, particularly ecosystem services that could be provided. The benefits and co-benefits, we could have a long conversation about that, but specific to the work that you two do, I'm wondering if you've seen any opportunity for partnership with governments in developing policy for what requirements we can have at a local level. In our instance, we are a home rule community, so we're able to be a little bit more stringent with our requirements of development. Have you been involved in policy development to say, you know what, we can pursue ground mount photovoltaics and, you know, plant it in such a way that we're talking deep root systems and maybe perennial grazing, that at the end of useful life of that system, maybe 20 or 30 years down the line, that site, which maybe previously had been traditional corn and soy agriculture, could have restored the soil to the point that it could be diversified vegetable growing, or it's serving a longer term purpose of pheasant habitat, or, you know, a shorter variety of prairie ecosystem. Kind of a sprawling question, but do either of you have experience in that?
For a sec.
Sure. So I'll start with asking if we are trying to help with policy, and that actually we are intentionally not trying to intersect with policy itself, not the policymakers within that small little valley. Winona is a very small city of 28,000 and shrinking, and we have at least 8,000 of that population is our students at Winona State. It is a little blip of a town nested in bluffs, surrounded by agriculture in a very, very rural, conservative area. A lot of the neighbors have very different ideological values, backgrounds, ideas, and that's part of that divide in our community. And so we're trying hard to not, you know, turn people off just because of us supporting a policy. Like, for example, Minnesota's Lawns to Legumes program was under threat. Our valley was actually the first one, the pilot program for their larger scale neighborhood demonstration garden. It went so well in Pleasant Valley, neighbor to neighbor, saying, hey, did you know about this program? You can help be reimbursed for planting pollinator stuff. Like, it worked there, but simply just the optics of us even writing a letter of support for the Lawns to Legumes program, that was enough for us to be like, oof, no. However, what we do a lot of, like, just have been in general and continue to do, and try to think maybe this is something to build on more, like it's a potential avenue in the future, is we provide feedback directly to the programs that are being run. So like CRP, Conservation Reserve, or Minnesota, it's the RIM, Restoration Management. Sorry. And because we are often that bridge between those programs and people doing it, because a lot of folks say like, great, I have a lot of land that I'll put into CRP, but I can't manage that. You know, I'm retired and I'm not going to be able to do it. We're like, cool. We have a huge group of volunteers that love to come out and do burns on private land so that private landowners will engage in these programs. Oftentimes, like, we don't even have to give the feedback to the natural resource entities because they're there volunteering their time as well. So they're there learning too. And so they're getting that feedback to refine, make those programs easier to engage in. I think one of a good example is like Olmsted County's Batch and Build for better incentives with agriculture specifically. But otherwise, we we do work closely with the prairie enthusiasts. One of our board members is a member of the Nature Conservancy. We work closely with Trout Unlimited, so we are in connection and providing feedback that way.
And I would say from our perspective, we historically haven't engaged a lot at the broader policy level, but we're shifting more in that direction. Quite frankly, we do have some government affairs teams. We do, as a membership-based organization, do some grassroots and grass tops advocacy. It's mostly focused on core government conservation programs, like how to build them right, how to make them attractive and appealing. We've done less to get into broader land use things like these developments, but we've really engaged more effectively with our national leadership, board of directors, and other folks to say it's important for us to be part of more of those conversations now. And the other way we do intersect is we have a kind of a whole separate team that helps with land management planning, helps with seed sourcing, helps with providing advice on how to establish habitat for pheasants, quail, for pollinators who do a lot of pollinator work. Most of those companies have that expertise in-house now too that they've built out, but we also provide assistance that way. Or for other corporate land prints, like how to find effective ways to manage power line utilities with native habitat rather than just constant mowing and trimming and other things like that. Yeah. Yeah. Any other burning questions to pose to both?
I also just realized in this moment, I think one of the intersections between the two of us, and I hope other people will think about this later, is that Restoravore, we provide that super hyper local feedback. It's very anecdotal, right? Like it is just for us and our situation in our area. But we provide feedback to entities that are trying to look at it more regionally and like take everybody's feedback from everywhere so that that policy advice is not biased by just us who are really motivated, a ton of people that, you know, talk to them. Instead, we can also funnel information to organizations like the Midwest Grassland Initiative, who can then advocate for everyone at that policy level.